I'm Jenna, 28. The snow outside the window is falling silently, covering the world in a pristine white. I'm sitting on my small couch, the soft glow of the table lamp casting a warm halo around me. The air is filled with the faint smell of cinnamon from the bakery downstairs, a scent that has become a comforting companion in my new life. As I look around at my humble apartment, memories of last Christmas flood back, a painful chapter that changed everything. Last Christmas, I walked into my childhood home filled with hope. The house was adorned with twinkling lights and a large, beautifully decorated Christmas tree. The sound of Christmas carols filled the air, and the smell of a delicious meal wafted from the kitchen. But little did I know that this seemingly perfect family gathering would turn into a nightmare. My family had always been the center of my world. My father, Henry, was a hard, working man who had dedicated his life to his job at the local factory. My mother, Victoria, was a traditional woman who took pride in her role as a homemaker. My younger brother, Ethan, 25, was the golden child of the family. He was an excellent athlete in high school, got a full scholarship to a top-tier university, and now worked as a software engineer at a well-known company. I, on the other hand, had been through a rough patch. I married my college sweetheart, Ryan, right after graduation. For 6 years, I tried my best to be the perfect wife. I worked as a graphic designer at a small firm, kept our apartment clean, and organized wonderful parties for Ryan's colleagues. But behind the scenes, our marriage was in trouble. Ryan became more and more distant, spending long hours at work and avoiding conversations about our future. One day, I found text messages on his phone that revealed he had been having an emotional affair with his coworker, Lily, for over a year. When I confronted him, he got angry and blamed me for being too clingy. I suggested marriage counseling, but he refused, saying it wasn't a real affair since nothing physical had happened. Heartbroken, I made the difficult decision to file for divorce. The process was a battle. Ryan fought me on every detail, from dividing our savings to splitting our belongings. By the time it was over, I was emotionally and financially drained. I couldn't afford our apartment on my own, so I moved back to our hometown. I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment above Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's coffee shop on Elm Street. It was small, only about 400 square feet, and it always smelled like freshly brewed coffee and pastries. Mrs. Thompson, a kind-hearted 72-year-old, gave me a break on rent in exchange for helping her with the shop's accounts a few hours a week. My family's reaction to my divorce was not what I expected. My parents had adored Ryan, or at least the idea of him. When I told them about the divorce, instead of comfort, I got questions about what I had done wrong and suggestions that I should have tried harder. Ethan had recently gotten engaged to Ava, a brilliant doctor-to-be. She came from a wealthy family. Her father was a well-known businessman, and her mother was a socialite. Ava was everything I wasn't: successful, confident, and the kind of person my family wished I could be. As Christmas approached, I hoped that the holiday would bring us closer. I spent money I could barely afford on gifts. For my father, I found an old pocket watch at an antique store, reminding me of the one his grandfather had owned. For my mother, I bought a delicate hand-painted scarf from a local artist. For Ethan and Ava, I chose a beautiful photo frame, imagining them using it for their engagement photos. I also had good news to share. After months of interviews, I had been offered a position as a senior graphic designer at a growing company in the nearby city. It meant a significant raise and the chance to move into a better place. The week before Christmas, my mother called to finalize the dinner plans. She mentioned that she had also invited my father's sister, Clara, and her husband, Philip, along with their son, Oliver. Clara and Philip lived in the city. Philip was a successful stockbroker, and Clara was a real estate agent. Oliver, 30, was a high-flying lawyer who had just made partner at a prestigious law firm. My mother also said that Ava's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reed, would be joining us. This made the dinner more of a formal event than a simple family gathering. On Christmas morning, I drove to my childhood home. The snow-covered streets and familiar landmarks brought back memories of happier times. When I arrived, the house looked magnificent. The front porch was decorated with garlands, and a large wreath hung on the door. As I walked up the steps, the door opened, and Ethan stood there, looking sharp in his suit. Behind him was Ava, wearing a beautiful, expensive-looking dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Jenna, you're here," Ethan said, giving me a quick hug. Ava smiled politely and said, "You look nice. That dress suits you." But there was something in her tone that made me feel like it was a backhanded compliment. Inside, the house was bustling. The dining room table was set with my mother's best china, and crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. In the kitchen, my mother was in her element, directing the meal like a general. She looked elegant in her red dress, her hair neatly styled. When she saw me, she kissed my cheek and said, "Jenna, you look wonderful. How was the drive?" I replied, "It was fine, Mom. The roads were clear." She then added, "Well, with the Reeds coming, I wanted everything to be perfect. Mr. Reed is such an important man, and Mrs. Reed is very involved in charity work." In the living room, my father was deep in conversation with Mr. Reed about business. Mr. Reed was a tall, imposing man with a confident demeanor. Clara and Philip were chatting with Mrs. Reed, who was a refined woman with a regal air. Oliver was standing by the fireplace, sipping a glass of wine. He looked every bit the successful lawyer in his expensive suit. "Jenna, I heard you're back in town," he said. "How do you like small town life after the city?" I tried to sound positive and said, "It's actually quite nice. There's a certain charm to it." He nodded and said, "I'm sure it's a change. I imagine this past year has been tough for you." His words made it sound like I was a failure. Just then, Ethan and Ava announced their wedding plans. They were getting married in a luxurious villa in France in June. Ava showed us pictures of the place on her phone, and it looked like a dream. Everyone was overjoyed, and my parents were especially excited about the idea of a destination wedding. I forced a smile and added my congratulations, even though I knew I couldn't afford such a trip. As the conversation continued, it seemed like every topic was about someone else's success. Oliver was buying a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood. Mr. Reed had just closed a major business deal. Mrs. Reed was organizing a high-profile charity event. When there was a lull, I decided to share my good news. "I have some exciting news, too. I've been offered a great job at a new company," I said, trying to match the enthusiasm in the room. But the response was lukewarm. I got a few polite "that's nice" comments and some half-hearted nods. Dinner was served, and the table was filled with a delicious feast. But the atmosphere was tense. The conversation during dinner was like a carefully choreographed dance. Oliver regaled us with stories from his law firm, talking about high-profile cases he was working on. Mr. Reed joined in, sharing his views on business and the economy. Ethan and Ava talked about their wedding plans, with Ava describing her dress shopping experience in Paris. When Clara asked about my new job, I tried to explain how innovative the company was and how it would give me a chance to grow. But she just said, "That sounds nice, dear. Graphic design is so modern. I'm not sure I understand it all." Philip then chimed in with advice. "Jenna, the key is to find a stable job. These new companies can be risky." Mr. Reed agreed, saying, "In business, we always look for stability and proven track records." I felt my excitement deflate. I tried to explain that the company had been around for a few years and had a good client base, but the conversation had already moved on. As the meal went on, I felt more and more like an outsider. My parents' attention was focused on everyone else's achievements. When Ethan talked about his work, my father asked detailed questions and showed genuine interest. When Ava mentioned her medical research, my mother listened intently. But when I tried to talk about my job, they seemed distracted. Dessert was being served, a combination of my mother's famous apple pie and Ava's contribution of some fancy French pastries. Mr. Reed, perhaps a bit tipsy, started talking about life choices and responsibility. "By the time you're in your late 20s, you should have your life together. Life is about making smart decisions and seeing them through," he said. Mrs. Reed nodded in agreement. "We've always taught Ava to be responsible and committed." I felt like these comments were aimed at me, a not so subtle reference to my divorce. I took a sip of my wine, my hands shaking slightly. Oliver then joined in, saying, "In law, we see a lot of people who take the easy way out. But true success comes from hard work and perseverance." Philip raised his glass and said, "That's right. Young people these days need to be more committed." I couldn't take it anymore. I said quietly, "Sometimes, the hardest thing is to have the courage to leave a bad situation." The table fell silent. My mother's face tightened, and my father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ethan tried to change the subject, saying, "Let's focus on the positive. It's Christmas after all." But my mother wasn't going to let it go.
"Jenna, we're worried about you."
"You're 28, and you're living like a student. You gave up on your marriage without really trying," she said, her voice taking on a condescending tone. I felt my anger rising. I didn't give up. I left a marriage where my husband was having an affair and refused to get help, I said firmly. Clara then chimed in. "All marriages have problems. You should have fought for it." Mr. Reed looked at me with a clinical eye and said, "Jenna, you need to learn from this experience and make better choices. Patterns tend to repeat themselves." I was furious. What better choices? Should I have stayed in a loveless marriage just to keep up appearances? I asked. Ava then spoke up. "I think balance is important. I'm pursuing my career, but I also know that family comes first." Her words made me feel even more out of place. Ethan, looking increasingly uncomfortable, tried again to change the subject, but my mother was determined. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Jenna, since you're so defensive, I think it's time to be honest. We're ashamed of you. Look at your brother. He's successful and engaged. And you're living in a tiny apartment, working at a job that barely pays the bills, and divorced because you couldn't handle your marriage." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. I looked around the table, hoping to see some sign of support, but all I saw were nods of agreement. Ethan looked away, and Ava squeezed his hand sympathetically.
But then something inside me snapped.
I stood up slowly, my eyes fixed on my mother. "You want to talk about shame? Let me tell you what real shame is. Shame is a mother who had an affair when her daughter was 12. Shame is a father who drank himself into oblivion for years, trying to hide the pain." My mother's face turned as white as a sheet. My father dropped his fork, his mouth hanging open in shock. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "We've all been living a lie, pretending that our family is perfect. And you have the nerve to judge me? Ethan, remember sophomore year of college? How you cheated on your girlfriend and made me cover for you." Ethan's face went pale, and Ava looked at him in disbelief. I turned to the rest of the guests. "You all sit here, judging my life, but you have no idea what I've been through. I divorced because I chose honesty over a lie. I'm rebuilding my life with courage, and I'm proud of that." The room was deathly silent. My mother started to cry, gasping, "Jenna, I didn't mean..." But her words were lost in the chaos. My father was staring at me, a mixture of shock and something like respect in his eyes. Ethan was trying to explain himself to Ava, his face red with embarrassment. I grabbed my coat and purse and walked out of the house. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but it was a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere inside. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The burden of trying to please my family was finally lifted. Back in my apartment, I let the tears flow freely. But as the night wore on, I felt a new sense of peace. I realized that I didn't need my family's approval to be happy. I was in control of my own life. The next morning, I woke up with a clear purpose. I called the local homeless shelter and volunteered to help with the Christmas Day meal. The other volunteers were warm-hearted people who didn't care about my past or my family. They were just there to help. As I worked in the kitchen preparing plates of food, I felt a sense of fulfillment. The people we served were grateful, and their smiles were the best gift I could have received. By the end of the day, I was exhausted but happier than I had been in a long time. In the following weeks, the aftermath of that Christmas dinner continued to unfold. Ethan called me, apologizing for his behavior and admitting that he had been struggling with his own insecurities. He said that Ava had postponed their wedding while she sorted out her feelings. My father sent me a letter, acknowledging his drinking problem and apologizing for the pain he had caused. My mother's response was more complicated. She called me several times, sometimes crying, sometimes angry. She couldn't seem to understand that her actions had hurt me deeply, but I had learned to set boundaries. I decided to love her from a distance, protecting myself from her criticism. As time passed, I focused on my new job. My colleagues at the company were supportive, and I was given more and more responsibilities. I also met Jacob, a kind-hearted teacher who worked at the local school. We started dating, and our relationship was built on mutual respect and understanding. By summer, I had moved into a larger apartment. I had a job I loved, meaningful friendships, and a loving partner. I rarely thought about my family's approval anymore. I had learned that authenticity and self-acceptance were more important than anything else. Looking back on that Christmas, I realized it was the worst and the best thing that ever happened to me. It destroyed my illusions of a perfect family, but it also set me free to build a life that was truly my own. The pain of that night taught me that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love us the most can hurt us the deepest, but it's also through these experiences that we find our true strength. The snow outside has stopped now, and the moon is shining brightly through the window. I take a deep breath, feeling grateful for the journey I've been on. I know that there will still be challenges ahead, but I'm ready to face them with courage and confidence.